The Impossible Challenge. The Grand Assembly Hall on Station Omega-7 buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from across the galaxy gathered for what many considered the most anticipated event in centuries. Floating platforms held dozens of alien species, their advanced technology gleaming under the station's artificial suns. At the center of it all sat Admiral Zektar, his scaled hide reflecting the ceremonial lights as his reptilian eyes surveyed the assembly with cold satisfaction. For 3,000 years, the Nexus trial had stood as the ultimate test of survival and intelligence in the known galaxy. 847 species had attempted it. 847 species had failed. Some barely lasted hours before their representatives were carried out in medical pods. Others managed days or even weeks before the crushing impossibility of the trial broke their spirits and their bodies. The trial wasn't just difficult, it was designed to be impossible. Admiral Zektar rose from his command throne, his massive form casting shadows across the assembly floor. His voice carried the authority of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. When he spoke, the hall fell silent with the kind of respect reserved for those who controlled the fate of worlds. Esteemed beings of the Galactic Confederation, his words echoed through universal translators, reaching every species in their native tongue. Today we witness another species attempt what has never been accomplished. The Nexus trial remains unbeaten, unbroken, and unsurvived by any being in recorded history. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The Zephyrians, elegant beings of pure energy, flickered with anticipation. The Korvax, insectoid creatures known for their tactical brilliance, clicked their mandibles in what passed for excited conversation. Even the stoic granite folk, living stone beings who thought in geological time, seemed eager for the entertainment. The species attempting today's trial, Zektar continued, his tone carrying just a hint of amusement, calls itself humanity. They originate from a Class 7 Deathworld designated Earth in their primitive language system. Laughter erupted from several sections of the assembly. Class 7 Deathworlds were considered barely habitable by galactic standards. Most civilized species required extensive terraforming to make such worlds suitable for colonization. The idea that a species could evolve naturally on such a hostile planet was considered either tragic or comedic, depending on one's perspective. These humans, Zektar's voice carried over the laughter, have been in contact with galactic civilization for barely 2 of their rotational periods. Their technology level remains embarrassingly primitive. They have not yet mastered gravity manipulation, their fastest ships require months to travel distances our scouts cover in days, and their computational systems are so basic that they still rely on quantum processing rather than consciousness-based computing. More laughter, some of it genuinely sympathetic. The Altarians, known for their philanthropic nature, made soft humming sounds that indicated pity for the poor, primitive humans who were about to face impossible odds. Then the humans walked in. The laughter died. Captain Sarah Chen entered the hall with the kind of confident stride that suggested she owned not just the room, but probably the entire station. She was average height for a human, her black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing what appeared to be a simple flight suit with minimal equipment. Behind her walked Dr. Marcus Webb, a tall, lanky man whose calm demeanor suggested he was either supremely confident or completely insane. Bringing up the rear was Elena Rodriguez, nicknamed Spark by her teammates, a compact woman whose hands were already moving as she studied the hall's architecture with the focused attention of someone mentally cataloging everything for later use. What shocked the assembled aliens wasn't the humans themselves. It was what they didn't bring. Every previous species had arrived with massive support teams. The Korvax had brought 7 ships loaded with survival equipment. The Zephyrians had created portable energy matrices that could power small cities. The granite folk had literally transported sections of their homeworld to use as backup shelter materials. The humans brought 3 small bags and what appeared to be camping equipment. Admiral Zektar's eyes narrowed as he studied the human delegation. In his 3 centuries of life, he had seen every type of arrogance. Some species arrived boasting about their superior intellect. Others claimed their advanced technology would make the trial trivial. A few had even suggested that their spiritual enlightenment would guide them to success where others had failed. But he had never seen a species arrive looking like they were going on a weekend hiking trip. Captain Chen! His voice carried a warning edge that had made entire fleets surrender without firing a shot. I feel obligated to inform you of the nature of what you're attempting. The Nexus trial is not a simple survival exercise. It is a comprehensive test designed by the ancient architects, a species so advanced that their abandoned technology still surpasses our best efforts. The trial takes place in an environment that has been specifically engineered to challenge every aspect of survival, intelligence, and adaptability. Sarah looked up at the massive admiral and smiled. It wasn't the desperate smile of someone trying to convince themselves they could succeed. It wasn't the manic grin of someone who had lost touch with reality. It was the calm, friendly smile of someone who was genuinely looking forward to an interesting challenge. "That sounds fascinating," she replied, her voice carrying easily through the hall's acoustics. "We're really excited to see what you've got." The word excited caused several aliens to make sounds that their translators struggled to interpret. Excitement was not typically associated with facing impossible odds and probable death. Dr. Webb stepped forward, pulling out what appeared to be a simple handheld device. "Admiral, if I may ask, what's the current record for survival time in the trial?" Zektar's expression shifted to something that might have been confusion if he were capable of such an emotion. "The Korvax hive mind managed to survive for 47 of your days before their collective consciousness fractured under the psychological pressure." 47 days, Marcus nodded thoughtfully, making notes on his device. "And the shortest time? The Viperous Collective lasted approximately 4 of your minutes before they dissolved in panic." Elena looked up from her examination of the hall's structural supports. "What kind of environmental challenges are we talking about?" Admiral Zektar gestured to a holographic display that materialized above the assembly. Images of previous trial attempts played in horrifying detail. Alien beings struggling against hurricane-force winds filled with crystalline particles that could cut through starship hull material. Creatures collapsing under gravity fields that could crush diamonds. Teams of the galaxy's most advanced species reduced to whimpering survivors after exposure to psychic phenomena that could drive civilizations insane. The Nexus trial incorporates every environmental extreme found in the known galaxy, Zektar explained with something that might have been pride. Atmospheric toxicity that can dissolve cellular structures in minutes, temperature variations that range from absolute zero to stellar core levels, gravitational anomalies that can compress matter to neutron star density, and that's before we consider the active challenges. "Active challenges?" Sarah asked, though her tone suggested she was asking about the dinner menu rather than potentially lethal obstacles. The architects built the trial to respond and adapt to the species attempting it. It learns from their strengths and exploits their weaknesses. It creates scenarios specifically designed to break the spirit and body of whatever beings dare to challenge it. The trial doesn't just want to test you, it wants to defeat you. The 3 humans exchanged glances, then Elena grinned. "So it's interactive, that's even better." The silence that followed was the kind usually associated with the moments before natural disasters. Admiral Zektar found himself wondering if these humans were simply too primitive to understand what they were facing, or if there was something else at work here. "Captain Chen," he said slowly, "I must ask. Your species has had access to our records of the trial. You've seen the footage of what happens to those who attempt it. Why do you appear so unconcerned?" Sarah's smile widened slightly. "Admiral, with respect, I think there might be something you don't understand about humans." "And what might that be?" "We're from Earth," she said simply, as if that explained everything. When the Admiral's expression remained unchanged, Dr. Webb elaborated. "Earth is what we call home. It's the planet where everything is actively trying to kill you, where you have to earn your right to exist every single day, and where the weather can change from pleasant sunshine to deadly tornado in the time it takes to finish lunch." Elena nodded enthusiastically. "Our oceans have creatures that can dissolve you with a touch. Our land has predators that hunt in packs and can track you for days. Our atmosphere has storms that can level entire cities, and that's just Tuesday for us." "But more importantly," Sarah added, her voice carrying a note that made several aliens in the assembly lean forward to listen better, "Earth taught us something that I think your trial might not have encountered before." "Which is?" "We learned a long time ago that impossible is just another word for something nobody's figured out yet." The humans shouldered their simple packs and headed toward the trial entrance with the casual confidence of people going for a nature walk. Behind them, the greatest minds in the galaxy sat in stunned silence, beginning to wonder if they had just witnessed the prelude to the most spectacular failure in galactic history, or something else entirely. When preparation meets reality. The staging area for the Nexus trial resembled a small city more than a preparation zone. Massive transport vessels lined the artificial horizon, their cargo bays disgorging equipment that represented the pinnacle of galactic engineering. The Korvax had arrived with 17 atmospheric processors, each one capable of creating breathable environments on hostile worlds. Their insectoid forms scuttled between towering stacks of survival gear that could sustain a colony for decades. The Zephyrians, beings of pure energy who rarely bothered with physical forms, had constructed elaborate containment matrices that hummed with power signatures strong enough to jumpstart dead stars. Their preparations alone had required the evacuation of 3 neighboring systems as a safety precaution. Watching them work was like observing controlled lightning build a fortress out of crystallized space-time. Even the notoriously practical granite folk had transported sections of their homeworld, literally bringing mountains of living stone that could reshape themselves into any configuration needed for survival. Their preparations had taken 6 months and required a fleet of heavy cargo haulers just to move the basic materials. In the center of this technological marvel, the human team sat on simple folding chairs, sharing what appeared to be sandwiches from a basic cooling unit. Admiral Zektar watched them through the observation deck's reinforced viewing ports, his reptilian features twisted in confusion. In his centuries of overseeing trial preparations, he had never seen anything quite like this. Every other species had spent months, sometimes years, preparing for this moment. Teams of scientists, engineers, and survival specialists had pored over every piece of available data about the trial environment. The humans had spent the morning playing some sort of card game. Sir, his aide, a nervous Altarian named Veltar, approached with a data pad clutched in his four-armed grip. The final equipment manifests have been submitted by all participating species. Zektar gestured for the report, expecting the usual massive lists of survival gear, backup systems, and emergency protocols. The Korvax manifest ran to 47 pages of technical specifications. The Zephyrians had submitted what appeared to be mathematical equations rather than an equipment list, but their energy requirements alone could power a small star system. Then he reached the human manifest. 3 backpacks, basic camping supplies, water purification tablets, emergency medical kit, multi-tool, rope, and... He paused, reading the entry twice to make sure his translator was functioning properly. Are they seriously listing good boots as essential survival equipment? Veltar's chromatophore patches flickered with embarrassment. I verified the translation 17 times, sir. They also listed positive attitude and common sense as critical gear. Admiral Zektar had witnessed the death of stars and the birth of civilizations. He had seen species achieve transcendence and watched others destroy themselves in fits of hubris, but this was beyond his considerable experience. Down in the staging area, Dr. Marcus Webb was conducting his own observations. While other species focused on their equipment, he watched the trial environment through the massive viewing screens that showed real-time conditions inside the testing zone. The Nexus trial took place in a pocket dimension, artificially created by the ancient architects using technology that modern galactic civilizations still couldn't fully understand. The environment was breathtaking in its hostility. Crystalline storms raged across landscapes that shifted between molten rock and frozen vacuum without warning. Gravity wells appeared and disappeared randomly, creating zones where matter could be compressed to impossible densities or areas where objects simply floated away into dimensional rifts. The atmosphere itself was a toxic soup of elements that could dissolve most known materials. Elena, Marcus called to his teammate, who was currently examining the viewing screen's technical specifications rather than the hellscape it displayed. What do you think about the environmental parameters? Elena looked up from her impromptu technical analysis of the alien display technology and glanced at the trial zone. She watched for about 30 seconds as a mountain-sized boulder was simultaneously frozen solid and set on fire while being stretched into impossible geometric shapes by competing gravitational fields. Looks like a Tuesday in the Australian outback during cyclone season, she said with a shrug. Though the gravity thing is new, that could be interesting. Nearby, a team of Korvax engineers overheard this comment and began making the clicking sounds their species produced when experiencing extreme stress. One of them approached their group, his compound eyes reflecting genuine concern. Humans, the Korvax clicked in carefully pronounced galactic standard, perhaps you do not fully comprehend the danger level of the trial environment. Our calculations indicate a 97.3% probability of immediate death upon entry, with the remaining 2.7% representing various forms of extended suffering before inevitable death. Captain Sarah looked up from her sandwich and smiled at the insectoid being. That's very thoughtful of you to be concerned. What's your team's survival strategy? The Korvax gestured proudly toward their massive preparation area. "We have brought 17 redundant life support systems, each with backup power sources that can function independently for 47 standard days. Our atmospheric processors can create safe zones within a 50-meter radius. Our gravitational compensators can maintain local space-time stability. Our emergency evacuation protocols include 12 different extraction methods." "That sounds very thorough," Sarah nodded approvingly. "We're planning to adapt as we go." "Adapt? As you go?" The Korvax's mandibles clicked rapidly. "But what if your primary systems fail?" "We'll figure something else out." "What if your backup systems fail?" "We'll improvise." "What if the environment exceeds your preparation parameters?" "We'll learn something new." The Korvax stood silent for several moments, his compound eyes processing this information. Finally, he made a sound that the translator rendered as confused chittering before returning to his team to report what was either the most brilliantly subtle strategy he had ever encountered or complete insanity. As the final preparation hours ticked by, the differences between the human approach and everyone else's became more apparent. The Zephyrians were conducting elaborate energy harmonization rituals that required precise calculations and absolute concentration. The granite folk were performing geological communion ceremonies with their transported mountain sections. Even the normally efficient Korvax were running final diagnostic checks that involved thousands of individual system verifications. The humans were taking a nap. Elena had fashioned a pillow from her backpack and was sleeping peacefully despite the cacophony of alien preparation activities around her. Marcus was reading what appeared to be a paper book, an ancient technology that most galactic species had abandoned millennia ago. Sarah was doing some sort of physical exercises that looked deceptively simple but caused several observing aliens to comment on the apparent efficiency of human biomechanics. Admiral Zektar found himself increasingly agitated by the humans' casual attitude. He had overseen 847 previous trials. He knew what preparation looked like. He understood the psychological profiles of species attempting to overcome impossible odds. Everything about the human approach violated every principle of survival preparation he had learned in 3 centuries of experience. "Sir," Veltar approached again, his chromatophore patches now cycling through colors that indicated deep confusion. "The human team is requesting permission to enter the trial zone early." "Early?" Zektar's voice carried the kind of surprise usually reserved for learning that the laws of physics had been repealed. "They want to start before the scheduled time?" "They say they're ready now and don't see any point in waiting around." Every other species had used every available minute of preparation time. Some had even requested extensions. The Vaporous Collective had spent so long preparing that they had actually evolved into a more advanced form of consciousness before attempting the trial, though it hadn't helped them survive longer than 4 minutes. "What exactly," Zektar asked slowly, "do they think they're ready for?" Down in the staging area, Sarah was having a similar conversation with a delegation of concerned aliens. Representatives from 6 different species had approached the human team to offer advice, equipment, or emergency evacuation coordinates for when the inevitable failure occurred. Captain Chen, the leader of the delegation, a crystalline being whose species had survived 12 whole hours in the trial, spoke with the authority of experience. "We feel obligated to share our hard-learned lessons about trial survival. The environment will attempt to exploit your species' inherent weaknesses. For us, it manifested as harmonic resonance attacks that shattered our crystalline matrix. For the Korvax, it created isolation scenarios that disrupted their hive-mind connection. What do you anticipate will be your species' primary vulnerability?" Sarah considered the question seriously. It was a good question, and the aliens' concern was genuine. These beings had faced the trial themselves and wanted to help others avoid their mistakes. "I think," she said finally, "our biggest vulnerability is probably going to be overconfidence." The aliens exchanged glances that suggested this was not the answer they had expected. "Overconfidence?" the crystalline being asked. "But surely your species must have some fundamental weakness that the trial can exploit." "All species do. The Zephyrians are vulnerable to energy drain. The granite folk can be destabilized by rapid environmental changes. The Altarians cannot function without social cohesion. What is humanity's critical failure point?" Marcus looked up from his book. "Well, we do have a tendency to try to fix things that aren't necessarily broken." Elena yawned and stretched. "And we get stubborn when someone tells us something is impossible. Plus," Sarah added with a grin, "we have this weird habit of finding the worst possible way to do something and then doing it anyway just to prove it can be done." The delegation stared at them in growing confusion. These weren't weaknesses that could be exploited by an environmental trial. These were behavioral characteristics that might actually be advantageous in a survival situation. As the final minutes of preparation time expired, the massive screens around the staging area came alive with the traditional pre-trial ceremony. Admiral Zektar's image appeared, his reptilian features grave with the weight of tradition and the sobering reality of what was about to unfold. Representatives of the Korvax hive mind, the Zephyrian Energy Collective, the Granite Folk Commune, the Altarian Harmony Circle, and... He paused, looking directly at the human team. The human expedition. You are about to attempt the Nexus trial, a challenge that has remained unbeaten for 3,000 years. 847 species have failed, many have died, all have been forever changed by the experience. The staging area fell silent except for the hum of alien technology and the distant sound of Elena cracking her knuckles. The trial environment will test every aspect of your survival capabilities. It will challenge your intelligence, your adaptability, your unity, and your will to continue when all hope appears lost. The environment itself will become your enemy. The trial will learn your weaknesses and exploit them without mercy. Sarah stood up and shouldered her simple backpack, checking the straps with the casual efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. You may enter the trial zone when ready. May the wisdom of your ancestors guide you, and may your preparation prove sufficient for the challenges ahead. The other species began their elaborate entry procedures. The Korvax formed precise geometric formations around their equipment. The Zephyrians began energy harmonization sequences that made the air itself hum with power. The Granite folk performed final communion rituals with their transported stone. The humans walked toward the trial entrance like they were heading out for a morning jog. Admiral Zektar watched them go, wondering if he was about to witness the shortest trial attempt in galactic history, or something else entirely. The Deathworld advantage. The moment the human team crossed the threshold into the Nexus trial, reality seemed to convulse around them. The transition from the sterile staging area to the trial environment was like stepping from a climate-controlled room directly into the heart of a cosmic hurricane. The air itself burned with toxic compounds that could dissolve starship hulls, while gravity fluctuated between crushing weight and weightless chaos with no apparent pattern. Above them, the artificial sky crackled with energy discharges that would have powered small cities, and below their feet, the ground alternated between molten rock and crystalline ice depending on which way the dimensional winds were blowing. Temperature readings that would have sent most species' equipment into emergency shutdown cycles barely registered on the humans' simple environmental sensors. Captain Sarah Chen took a deep breath of the toxic atmosphere, felt the burning sensation in her lungs that indicated immediate chemical damage to her respiratory system, and nodded approvingly. "Air's a bit thick," she commented to her teammates, "but not as bad as that mining station on Kepler 442b. Remember that place, Marcus? The one where the atmosphere was basically industrial solvent?" Dr. Marcus Webb was already taking readings with his handheld device, more out of scientific curiosity than survival necessity. Similar particulate composition, but with added crystalline compounds that create interesting diffraction patterns. Elena, you might want to see this. Elena Rodriguez was currently experiencing gravity that alternated between 3 times Earth normal and complete weightlessness every 15 seconds, a phenomenon that would have sent most species into immediate medical crisis. She was using the fluctuations to test the structural integrity of nearby rock formations by seeing which ones held together under the varying stress conditions. "Gravity's having some kind of breakdown," she called back cheerfully. "But the underlying geological structure is solid. We can work with this." Meanwhile, through the observation screens back in the staging area, the assembled alien dignitaries watched in stunned silence as their instruments registered environmental conditions that should have killed the humans within minutes of exposure. Admiral Zektar's scaled hide had shifted to a color his species only displayed during extreme stress, while various other council members made sounds that their translators diplomatically rendered as concerned chittering and existential questioning. "Sir," Veltar approached with a datapad that was displaying readings so extreme that the device kept asking if it was malfunctioning. "The environmental monitors are indicating that the humans should be experiencing immediate respiratory failure, cellular dissolution, and gravitational trauma." Admiral Zektar stared at the screens showing the human team casually exploring the trial environment like tourists visiting a particularly interesting natural disaster. What are they reading instead? According to their biometric data, Veltar paused to double-check the readings. They appear to be in excellent health. Heart rates are slightly elevated, consistent with moderate physical exercise. Brain activity shows high levels of engagement in what our systems are interpreting as enjoyment. The other species weren't faring quite as well. The Korvax team had managed to deploy 3 of their 17 atmospheric processors before the toxic environment began corroding their equipment faster than it could be repaired. Their precise hive mind coordination was being disrupted by the random gravitational fluctuations that made maintaining formation impossible. The Zephyrians were discovering that their energy-based forms were being destabilized by the chaotic electromagnetic fields generated by the trial environment. They had been forced to increase power consumption to their backup matrices just to maintain coherent consciousness, burning through energy reserves they had planned to use over weeks in a matter of hours. The granite folk were perhaps suffering the worst, as their living stone forms were being subjected to temperature variations that caused thermal expansion and contraction cycles rapid enough to create stress fractures in their essential matrices. Several had already been forced to enter emergency hibernation to prevent permanent structural damage. And through it all, the humans kept walking deeper into the trial zone like they were taking a nature hike. "You know what this reminds me of?" Sarah asked as they navigated around a crystalline storm that was simultaneously freezing and vaporizing everything in its path. "That camping trip in Siberia when the temperature dropped to -60 and the emergency heater broke." "Oh yeah," Elena nodded, carefully stepping over a crack in the ground that was bleeding molten rock while somehow also being covered in frost. "Good times, though this place has better visibility, and the gravity thing is kind of fun once you get used to it." Marcus was taking detailed notes on his simple device, fascinated by the impossible physics they were encountering. "The environmental systems here are fascinating. They're not just hostile, they're actively contradictory. It's like someone took every extreme environment in the galaxy and layered them on top of each other without caring about logical consistency." "So basically," Sarah grinned, "they created the ultimate death world and then asked civilized species to survive in it." "Pretty much. Except they forgot that we're not civilized species." Back in the observation area, this conversation was being translated and broadcast to the assembled alien dignitaries, who were beginning to understand that they might have made a fundamental error in their assumptions about humanity. The term death world in galactic classification referred to planets so hostile that they were considered unsuitable for life. The fact that an entire species had evolved naturally on such a world was considered either a cosmic tragedy or an impossible statistical anomaly. The fact that this species considered their death world home was something that hadn't really occurred to anyone. "Sir?" One of the Korvax observers clicked nervously to Admiral Zektar. "Our team is requesting permission to withdraw from the trial. Equipment failure rates have exceeded sustainable parameters, and several members are experiencing stress fractures in their exoskeletons." Admiral Zektar watched the humans on the screen as they encountered their first major trial challenge, a massive chasm that spanned several kilometers, filled with atmospheric conditions that registered as immediately lethal on every sensor system. The bottom of the chasm was visible only as occasional flashes of energy that suggested the presence of forces that could disintegrate matter on contact. Standard protocol for this obstacle involved complex engineering solutions. Previous species had attempted to bridge the chasm using advanced materials, create flying vehicles capable of surviving the hostile atmospheric conditions, or tunnel under the obstacle using equipment that could handle the underground environmental extremes. The humans looked at the chasm for approximately 30 seconds, then Elena pulled a length of rope from her backpack. "Elena?" Marcus asked with the tone of someone who had learned to be very careful about his teammates' engineering ideas. "Please tell me you're not planning to swing across a cosmic death chasm on a rope." "Of course not," Elena replied, tying one end of the rope to a nearby crystal formation that was somehow both structurally sound and completely transparent. "That would be stupid." Sarah and Marcus exchanged relieved looks. "I'm planning to swing across while the gravity fluctuations are in our favor, then set up a zipline system so you two can follow safely." The relieved looks disappeared. "Elena," Sarah said carefully, "this chasm is several kilometers wide and filled with forces that can disintegrate starship hulls." "Yeah, but look at the gravity pattern." Elena pointed to readings on Marcus's device. "Every 43 seconds, gravity reverses completely for about 8 seconds. If I time the swing right, I'll actually be falling upward for most of the trip. And the atmospheric conditions are only lethal if you're trying to breathe them for extended periods. I can hold my breath for 3 minutes if I have to." "What about the disintegration fields at the bottom?" "Only a problem if I fall, which I won't because I'm very good at this sort of thing." Marcus pulled up environmental data on his device. "The rope will experience thermal stress from temperature variations of approximately 800 degrees Celsius, corrosive effects from atmospheric acids, and gravitational stress that will vary between crushing compression and total weightlessness. Good thing it's a really good rope. Before anyone could stop her, Elena had secured her makeshift harness and was standing at the edge of the chasm, studying the gravitational patterns with the focused attention of someone calculating a complex physics problem in her head. Back in the observation area, alien species that had spent decades planning for this moment watched in horror as a human being prepared to cross an impossible obstacle using equipment that most of them would consider inadequate for basic camping. "Sir?" Veltar's voice had reached frequencies that suggested his entire worldview was undergoing rapid reconstruction. "Should we prepare emergency extraction procedures?" Admiral Zector was watching Elena's preparations with the fascination of someone witnessing something that shouldn't be possible. "I don't think our extraction procedures are designed for what she's about to attempt." Elena checked her knots one final time, took a deep breath of the toxic air that should have killed her, and waited for the gravity fluctuation. At exactly the right moment, she stepped off the edge of the chasm and began what was either the most spectacular suicide attempt in galactic history or the most insane display of practical engineering anyone had ever seen. For the first few seconds, she fell normally toward the energy discharges at the bottom of the chasm. Then gravity reversed, and she was suddenly flying upward and forward, using the rope as a guide while the hostile atmosphere tried to dissolve her equipment and the temperature variations tried to cook and freeze her simultaneously. She landed on the far side of the chasm with a casual roll, immediately began setting up anchor points for the zipline system, and called back to her teammates through the environmental chaos. "Piece of cake! The atmospheric conditions actually help with lift if you time it right." Sarah and Marcus crossed the impossible chasm using Elena's improvised zipline system in approximately 4 minutes, a feat that previous species had spent weeks attempting to accomplish with advanced engineering and massive technological resources. When they regrouped on the far side, Elena was already studying the next obstacle with the expression of someone who found interesting technical challenges personally entertaining. "So what's next?" she asked cheerfully. In the observation area, the first official withdrawal request was submitted. The Granite Folk commune announced that they were experiencing incompatible environmental parameters and would be extracting their remaining team members immediately. The Zephyrians followed shortly after, citing unsustainable energy expenditure rates. The Korvax held out for another hour before their hive-mind collective consciousness began fragmenting under the stress of trying to coordinate in an environment that made their usual precision impossible. Within 6 hours of the trial's beginning, every species except the humans had withdrawn. The humans were approximately 1/3 of the way through the course and complaining that they were getting hungry and should probably think about stopping for lunch soon. Admiral Zector stared at the observation screens in silence, beginning to understand that he wasn't watching a trial attempt. He was watching a complete redefinition of what the word impossible meant when applied to beings who had learned to call the impossible Tuesday.